Sprite Studio devlog number 3, scripting and animations. Okay, we have two new features in Sprite Studio right now. The first is going to be scripting. So scripting is basically a way for people to add features into Sprite Studio using scripting, which is basically Python that can be executed at runtime. And using this, you're able to do all kinds of things. It's kind of in its infancy now, but in the future there'll be several different kinds of scripts, and it'll be as simple as writing a script, putting it into a folder, and it'll appear in the program and you can execute it. So for an example, here's a little clip of me implementing like a gradient script. So it just creates a little gray gradient from black to white. And here's an example of that gradient being used in the program. We click on the edit menu within the file panel, then we click run script, and then we select the script we want. And the script will be called on whatever artboard is active, which would be whichever artboard you hovered last. Okay, let's move over to animations now. So I've created a little project with a bunch of little artboards, and you can see things have gone awry because we ran out of palette space, so we just started overwriting our palette. So you could start, I'm leaving this in to show that there's still development to be done here. This used to be the gradient like I showed before. Here we have a Mandelbrot that I'll be showing later, but this took too many colors from the palette, so it just started overwriting the old ones, and that messed everything up. But that's okay. So to show animations, to start off, you would come up here and click add animation. You can make an animation whatever we want. So doesn't really matter. Animation 1, very descriptive. Now we drop down this menu and click it, and it's activated. We can delete it. And if we want to edit this, we go to Project, Show Animation Panel. Now this is a new UI element that basically allows you to do whatever you want to animations. Whatever animation is active right here will be what you modify within this sort of UI element. If I can add more animations, of course. And we can switch between these at any time. Now, to start off with, we have these three sections within the animation panel itself. The first one over here on the left is probably the most useful. This is where you actually modify your animation. So, first thing that we see is a play button that will play your animation. But below that, we have a couple of things. First are these two sliders. We can click and drag these to change them. And what these represent is basically different ways to swap the frames of your animation. So we play these animations one after the other, and Sprite Studio gives you the ability to choose how you want to swap your sprites. Currently there are two options, which are shown in these radio buttons: swap by time, swap by updates. And these sliders correspond to that. Basically, with swap by time, it basically says there's a set number of milliseconds that each frame will take, and we start a timer, and once that timer reaches that time, we are ready to go to the next frame. So it's based on milliseconds. The second one is based on frames, so it'd be like tying your animations to your frame rate, to where you can say like each frame is going to take 10 frames, or each animation frame is going to take 10 game frames. The point of this is basically to allow you to kind of simulate how your animation will look within whatever kind of platform or program you're writing. So to start off, we can just start adding some animations, some artboards to this animation. So when I click add, we see that it adds it, and it appears in this frame here. It's out of position a little. Now when we added that, we noticed that a lot of other artboards got filtered out, whereas we used to see every artboard. Now we only see a couple. And the reason for that is because animations have the restriction that each frame has to be the same dimensions. So since we added one, we now know that this animation's dimensions are 150 by 150. And because of that, we can only add artboards that correspond to that. So if I just add the rest of these really quick, we will be able to see that there's no longer anything to add. We can move through this viewer here if we want. And all of the animation frames, which are artboards, have just been moved next to each other. So you can so the point of this is that now you can kind of visualize, and I'll just show this real quick. If we switch to this one, to a different animation where nothing has been added yet, we can actually add whatever artboards we want. So for example, let's say we add this one, it gets put below it. But if I add this other one right here, what's going to happen is that now, because these two artboards total width is actually greater than the other animation, it goes above it. So if I just need to make one more animation. Once we select that one, we can add these other last couple artboards to this. So for example, like that. And again, it filters out ones that are not the right size. And we can see that these artboards are sort of structured as a sprite sheet would be. So it's a bit of a visualization of how this would look when it exports, which is not in the program yet, but I'll talk about that later. Anyway, for each one of these animations, we can modify it just as you would expect. So let's say animation 1, we want to swap by time. We can move the slider and click play, and you can see it swap. So that's basically how it works. If we wanted to do it by updates, we would click this button and adjust this. This would correspond to how many frames need to pass before you can go to the next animation frame. So we have it set to 32, so it's like half of a second, right? 60 frames. What you can do is go into options and simulation frame rate. You can read this. It basically says how many frames do you want to target. Let's say it's 90. Now this should be faster because we're simulating 90 frames per second, so 32 frames is slower, which I think it is. So that's how that works. We have a button that will reset the frames view, so if this gets messed up, you can reset it. Here we can modify each frame individually. So in addition to everything I've just said, you can modify these frames by themselves. So for example, let's say that we want the first frame or the first 2 frames to be swapped by time. So we set swap type to time. And now this one overrides the animation setting, which should be frame updates, but the button is grayed out. It overrides that and it'll use time instead. So we can make this like a really large number, 144 milliseconds. And when we run this first frame is going to be a different time. 144 milliseconds. So it's 1/10 of a second, much faster. But basically, that's what you're able to do. You can do this for any of these. You could give it a custom time here where you type in a time. So like, let's say 900 milliseconds. Now when we run this first one should be a lot slower. And there we go. So this is the flexibility that this offers you. Now, it's nice and all, but the way it's going to work is that you're going to be able to export these animations when you export your program. When you export your project. When you do that, you're gonna get these little files, and what I'm going to do is write a library, open source C library, maybe write it in C and Java is what I kind of want to do. And what it can do is parse those animation files and make it easy to play them. And it'll be flexible, so if you don't want to use the library, you just want to load the data in and then handle it however you want, you can. It'll be flexible. I haven't done that yet, but that's on my list of things to do. So that's basically animations in a nutshell. Maybe some more stuff will be added to this, but for now I'm pretty confident with it, pretty happy about it. I think that's actually about it. As you can see, there's a lot of bugs right now with the palette being screwed up. So I have a lot to do. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, stick around, subscribe, because there will be more. Next video is going to be saving and loading. So you're going to be able to save projects and load them in again. Pretty obvious feature that every one of these types of programs needs. So see you next time.